Chapter 22. Capture and Escape. Stepping into the back room at the Three Broomsticks, Ambrose looked back at the fireplace. Well, that was somewhat less uncomfortable than the side-along apparition, he admitted, and a good deal cleaner than I had feared. The chimneys have had their spring clean, and this fireplace doesn't get any use at this time of year, Hannah smiled. Ginny arrived next, followed shortly afterwards by Dennis. The others were already there. Hey, everyone! Neville walked through the door from the lounge bar. Look what I found outside. Ron followed Neville through the doorway. He was stooped, dishevelled, and had red-rimmed eyes. How's Hermione? Ginny asked. She's got Healer Smethwick and Draco with her, Ron croaked. I was in the way. Told Smethwick to watch him closely. Ron, Draco's the best chance Hermione has against the old magic, Harry reassured him. What does he really know? He's just winging it and playing with his dark magic toys, Ron retorted with a bitter snarl. Come on, Ron, Harry scowled. Draco has changed. Really? Ron snapped. The Malfoys are always in the middle of this sort of thing. Ron, Ginny interjected, don't be a git. Draco was duelling his own father. He's on our side. He's our expert in the old magic. He was hit by a curse himself, but he's looking after Hermione. He's too bloody keen on Hermione, if you ask me, Ron almost shouted. Ambrose cleared his throat. Ronald, I've had the opportunity to get to know Professor Malfoy rather well over the past couple of weeks. He loves Astoria, his wife. True, he does hold high regard for Hermione, and they have researched together at times. But to be brutally frank, he is absolutely terrified of her. So worry not, he will do his best. The son is not the father. Ron eased. His shoulders relaxed. He even managed to snort, terrified of Hermione. Chicken. Hey! Cried Lydia, who was cradling the chicken in her arms. There you are, Ron, said Ginny with a nod. You and Draco have something in common. You're both terrified of the same person. I've got all your rooms ready. Would you like anything to eat before you go up? Hannah asked. We need to get up to the school, Harry announced. I've sent Hagrid a message. He should be here for us at any moment. Neville held out his hand. Harry, it's a bit late for visiting. Whoever Rakison has at Hogwarts could find out any moment what happened tonight, Harry pointed out. We can't waste a minute. Never mind stay overnight. Ron spoke up. Harry's right. This is the one lead we have that might take us to the ringleader behind all this. We've got to go. But it's nearly... Neville started to protest. It's not even 10 o'clock, Neville, Harry snapped. We're going. The noise from the bar swelled. That'll be Hagrid, Hannah said. Neville opened the door to find the doorway blocked by Hagrid's bulk. All right, Harry, Ron, everyone. Came as soon as I could. Got the sherry boom outside. Harry looked at his watch as they reached the steps of Hogwarts Castle. It was shortly after 10 o'clock. Ginny had taken the flu network back to her parents' house to check on the children. Dennis had disapparated back home to his wife, Rose. Harry was happy to let them go. He was keen not to arrive at Hogwarts with a crowd in tow. Neville had accompanied Harry's group up to the castle and had sent word ahead by Patronus to Professor Flitwick to let them in. Hagrid had said he would conceal the sherry-boom by the gates, as usual, then catch them up later. Neville had reluctantly disapparated from the castle gates back to the Three Broomsticks, as Harry's request. The great doors opened, and the tiny professor greeted them. Harry, Ronald, nice to see you again. Nice to see you too, Ambrose, and the delightful Lydia. Please come in. Phileas, said Harry. Thanks for meeting us and letting us in. Is Professor Lee in her office, do you know? I believe she will be, Harry. Are you sure you want to let her in on this? Harry frowned. Do you think she might be a suspect? Professor Flitwick paused for a second. I've been thinking, that's all. There are people we can vouch for from experience. Professor Lee, strictly speaking, is not one of them. You sound as though you'd not be disappointed if she were involved, Ambrose noted. Do you have any reason for your lack of enthusiasm towards her? Well, no, not at all. I wouldn't wish her any harm, but, well, there is something about our dear head teacher that I can't put my finger on. You're not the first to say that, Ron noted. A lot of people are uncomfortable with an American running Hogwarts, Harry declared. I think that's understandable, but it's just bias. I'll keep an open mind, but there are others I would suspect first. They had reached the ground floor corridor, in which Professor Lee's office and living quarters lay. I think we should start by talking to Professor Lee, Harry decided. Not out of suspicion, but out of courtesy. Phileas, Harry whispered, could you stay in the corridor to watch for anything unusual, and to be nearby in case we need any help? Delighted, dear boy, the diminutive professor squeaked. I'm the head aura, muttered Harry to himself. First Ambrose, now Flitwick. Is everyone going to start calling me dear boy? He was about to knock on Professor Lee's door, but Ambrose grabbed his wrist and made a sign for them to listen. There was the sound of someone quietly singing to themselves. It sounded to Harry like a woman's voice, but not Professor Lee's. It was a lighter voice, with a different accent. He indicated to Ron to have his wand at the ready and gestured to the others to stay behind them. Then he knocked. The singing stopped, and they heard footsteps approach the door, then pause for a moment. The handle turned, the door opened. Professor Lee was dressed in a silk dressing gown. Head Aura Potter, I'm delighted to see you, sir, the head teacher purred at him. There have been rumours that you were missing. I'm relieved they were wrong. Please, come in. Oh, and all your friends, too. She looked taken aback at the number of visitors she was receiving at this time of night. Harry reflected that this was not surprising, to be fair. I hope we're not interrupting, Professor, Harry apologised. Do you have any guests? No, sir. Quite alone as usual. I'm sorry to barge in on you like this, but I think we need your help. I'll help in any way I can, of course, Harry. What is your concern? We've recently come across a plot to destabilise the Ministry. We have arrested some of those involved. We learned from one that there might be a contact of theirs at Hogwarts. Harry had been watching for a reaction. The head teacher looked surprised and concerned. That seemed natural enough to Harry. Staff or students, do you think, Harry? Professor Lee was asking. I don't think there would be much advantage in having a student contact, but I'm not ruling it out. And quite a few of the staff I can personally vouch for, as they fought alongside us in the war. That leaves the newer staff. Pretty much all of my staff are on site, apart from Professors Malfoy and Longbottom. Professor Hagrid will be in his cottage, I imagine, unless he's, down the pub, as they say. She smiled. Those are all people we can vouch for anyway, Harry pointed out. I'd like to start with... Professor Marcus, Lydia interrupted. The others looked at her. He seems odd, she ventured. It's as good a place to start as any, Harry conceded. He wondered whether this was one of Lydia's insights, but, given the presence of the head teacher, he did not dare to ask. Very well. Let's go see Marcus. Professor Lee nodded. I think just you and I should go, Harry. That should not be necessary, Ambrose said. We will all be as quiet and discreet as possible. De Kelly is right, Ambrose, Harry retorted. We don't want to intimidate interviewees or tip off the real contact that we're looking for them. A frown clouded Ambrose's face. Then he smiled and shrugged. As you wish, Harry. The two auras and the head teacher it is. Ron stepped up to Harry's side. Harry felt a surge of annoyance. He was going to tell Ron that he was perfectly capable of looking after himself and De Kelly, but he stopped. He didn't want to seem petulant, especially in front of the head teacher. Okay, he decided. Let's go. Would you lead the way, Professor? The head teacher had a suggestion of a scowl on her face as she stepped past the auras. Harry thought she must be annoyed too by Ron's accompanying them. Should he order Ron to stay behind? After a second, he almost laughed at himself. Ron was his best friend and his brother-in-law. Of course he wanted Ron with them. In the corridor, they came across Professor Flitwick, who appeared to be examining a suit of armour. "Phileas," the head teacher addressed him, "what brings you here?"
"Oh, well, you see," he squeaked, "I was accompanying our guests here."
Professor Lee turned to look back. Lydia and Ambrose had also followed them out of the office.
"I heard you mention Professor Marcus," Flitwick continued. "Forgive me, Harry, but Tony Marcus is a very dear friend of mine. We were in the duelling club together in our youth. I owe him my life, several times over. I can personally vouch for him. He would never be mixed up in any anti-ministry wrongdoing, whatever it is."
"I heard that he killed a woman," Lydia piped up.
"Killed a woman?"
Flitwick was visibly shocked.
"A lady,"
Lydia insisted.
"Killed a lady? No, surely not."
The little professor frowned. Then his face cleared with the realization.
"Ah, I see, a lady killer. Yes. Tony considered himself to be something of a lady killer once. Actually, I'm not sure he's ever changed his mind. No fool like an old fool, as they say. No, young lady, that doesn't mean he literally killed anyone. Lady killer is a silly term we used to use for a man who ladies found attractive, and who took advantage of the fact. I believe the equivalent these days would be a player or some such."
"Well, if we can carry on now," Harry snarled.
Yes, of course. So sorry, Head Aura,"
Flitwick apologised. Lydia shuffled her feet.
"Sorry, Harry. Perhaps you might start with Stefano, Professor Verdi," Flitwick suggested. "Though I can assure you he's not a vampire, as some students have speculated."
Ambrose laid a gentle hand on Lydia's shoulder and smiled. "We will await your return in the head teacher's office, if we may." "Please do," Professor Lee sighed. "Phileas, would you tend to our nomad guests?"
"Certainly, Professor,"
he assured her. The head teacher and the two auras strode off down the corridor, Professor Lee's silk dressing gown billowing in her wake. Lydia followed her uncle back into the office, and the diminutive professor brought up the rear. Flitwick stood by the desk as the others took their seats. He rocked on his heels.
"Sorry, Mr. Flitwick," said Lydia. No, nothing to apologise for, my dear young lady," Flitwick smiled. "No need at all. You weren't to know about old friends and old slang words. You were brave to speak out, and no harm done."
"Not one of your insights, then?" her uncle murmured to her. She shook her head. Professor Flitwick offered them tea and cakes. Ambrose, of course, accepted gratefully. Lydia could not muster any appetite. Flitwick tried to talk to Lydia about her time at the school. It seemed to understand when she was clearly not in the mood to talk. The office fell into silence, except for the sounds of Ambrose consuming tea and cakes. Flitwick still did not sit down and started to pace across the soft carpet. After some time and several cakes, Ambrose observed, "You seem agitated, Phileas."
"You didn't see her, Ambrose," he explained, "but Professor Lee looked furious that I was in the corridor outside."
"I would never worry about infuriating people, Phileas," Ambrose replied. "On many occasions it is entirely warranted. I do it all the time."
"It's true," Lydia agreed. "He really does."
Flitwick smiled at her. "Indeed," Ambrose continued, "I believe I may have upset the great lady by suggesting that Ron accompany her and Harry." Lydia thought about this. Professor Lee had been noticeably keen for it to be her and Harry alone conducting the interviews. Harry had seemed quite happy with that arrangement. In fact, Lydia had thought he too had looked annoyed when her uncle had said both auras should go. Harry couldn't be interested in the head teacher. He had Ginny, who was wonderful, but he had called her by her first name, unexpectedly, without being prompted. It was like Harry and Professor Lee were in on something, together. But that was mad. He was Harry Potter, the head aura. He was the great enemy that Granville had been told to capture and sacrifice. They could not be in on something together.
"You look puzzled, my dear,"
Professor Flitwick was saying, she realised with a start.
Professor, she began, have you heard of an animagus? Why, yes, he replied, of course. Our previous head teacher, Minerva McGonagall, was one. A cat. Do you know how they're made, if that's the word? Not in any great detail, he frowned. That is transfiguration. I am a charms master. Why do you ask?
Ambrose looked at his niece intently.
Well, I was wondering how far you could go with turning into... she began.
But to that moment, Harry and Ron came into the office, Professor Lee close behind them. Harry looked triumphant. Got him, he proclaimed.
Oh, well done, dear boy,
Ambrose congratulated him. Ron looked happy but dazed. Professor Lee seemed pleased. Harry was clearly delighted.
Who was it?
Professor Flitwick inquired. Professor Hughes, Harry told them.
Jack?
Flitwick sounded astonished. He's tied up in his room, and we've taken his wand. We're going to take him with us and get Dennis to help us question him, Harry pronounced.
But what gave him away?
Flitwick asked. Don't repeat this to anyone else, said Harry in a lowered voice. I used legilimency on him, and I saw him talking to her, telling her he would keep her updated. She was slim and blonde, not very tall, exactly as you said Granville had described her, Ambrose. He even called her a Lauria in the memory I saw. Lydia had had to go without having her question answered, but her suspicions and her ideas were coming together. She was still unsure how, but she felt she could understand some of the why. She stepped forwards.
Professor Lee, she ventured.
Yes, my dear?
Were you De Kelly first or a Lauria?
What are we talking about now?
You're an animagus, aren't you?
Lydia said. I'm sorry, Lydia, isn't it? The professor continued smoothly. I'm not following you. Who is this Lauria Rackison? In an instant, 3 wands were drawn and were pointed at the head teacher. Professor Lee shrugged and half raised her hands. As you probably realised, Professor, Harry smiled, nobody mentioned that a Lauria had the surname Rackison. The American shrugged. I know. What a dumb mistake to make. I imagined you'd like me to tell you all my plans and then come quietly. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I guess now I've got to, well, leave. With that, the professor faded from the room, as if she had dissolved into the air itself. For a long moment they were all stunned. Then Ron swore loudly, bringing them all back to themselves. What just happened? Ron asked. Sorry about the swearing, but... Well, said Ambrose, it has transpired that Professor Lee was also arch-villainess Lauria Rackison, a human-to-human animagus, as Lydia seems to have worked out before any of the rest of us. And she appears to have disappeared, as you can see, or not.
A human-to-human animagus, eh? Extraordinarily advanced indeed. I've never heard of anybody achieving such a thing.
Flitwick sounded admiring of the American professor for once.
Minerva will be fascinated, I'm sure. And there has always been the rumour, Flitwick said in a hushed tone, that the real reason she didn't use the old head's office is because it wouldn't let her in.
Ron interrupted. All those times Hermione told us you can't apparate in or out of Hogwarts. Hogwarts a history, said Harry. Exactly, Ron agreed. How did Lee, or Rackison, manage to do it?
Well, precisely, said Flitwick. When I first met her, I was not particularly impressed. She knew her subject, but she was always reluctant to demonstrate. It seems she was more powerful than we imagined.
Old magic, perhaps, Harry mused. Or indeed, first-generation high magic, Ambrose ventured. Flitwick frowned.
What are we talking about?
What if Professor Lee didn't seem powerful because her magic is different? Harry asked. Like Lydia, Ron added. We know she's magical after the ritual Granville did, but she doesn't feel very magical to us. But she can do stuff none of us can.
You're magical, Lydia?
Flitwick was astonished and delighted.
Oh, I say, that is good news. How did you...
It is a lengthy and abstruse tale, Phileas. I will tell you all about it at some later juncture, if I may. For now, suffice it to say that we owe yet more gratitude to our dear Lydia, Ambrose pointed out. Once again, she has outshone us all. It wasn't like the other times, she told them. It wasn't one of my insights, not in the same way anyway. I was wondering why she was keen to be alone with Harry, and why Harry was going along with it. I thought about that, Ron muttered. Got a completely different answer, though. Lydia scowled at him. Well, I thought she might be controlling his mind, and she wanted to kill him, like Aloria had told Granville to do. So she must have been the contact we were looking for. And then I thought about the animaguses you told me you'd read about, Uncle. They also serve who sit and read books, Ambrose smiled. Might I suggest we release Professor Hughes? Flitwick asked. Oh, right. Harry looked horrified. Yes, please, Phileas. Could you do the honours and apologise for me? Is it acceptable for me to blame Professor Lee? He smiled. Yes, I think people will know pretty soon that she's gone, but don't go into details, Phileas, please. We don't want this case to become common knowledge. Let Professor Hughes know we'd like to keep it confidential. Professor Verdi as well, if you can. Flitwick nodded his acknowledgement and strode from the office, as purposefully as his stature would allow. There goes a man who looks happy to be part of the action once again, Ambrose observed. How did you work out the animagus thing, Lydia? Ron asked. I didn't really. Uncle Ambrose had read about them, and I was wondering if it could be done going from a human to a different human. I was asking Professor Flitwick about it when you came back, and I didn't get an answer. So I asked her about it to see if she'd react. Which she did quite spectacularly, I thought, Ambrose commented. In my experience, that didn't have the appearance of an ordinary workaday disapparition. That wasn't anything I've seen before either, Harry confirmed. She's definitely unusual, that one. So you believe Professor Lee, or Aloria, underwent the old magic ritual? Ambrose asked. Possibly, Harry admitted. But that means Aloria must have been a muggle originally. Otherwise the change would have killed her. So how... Or maybe she found another part of the ritual which stopped it killing her, Ron ventured. What does seem likely is that Aloria was the one who had the grimoire first, Ambrose said. She provided a copy to Granville. It would appear she played him all along. She knew the ritual. She had used it on herself. So now she has powers we know nothing about, said Harry. And she's gone. Great. But where's she gone? Ron asked. Just when we thought we were getting somewhere. Where would you go if you were a super powerful witch who had outwitted a couple of stupid auras? Asked Harry bitterly. Home? Lydia suggested. Lee hailed from America, Ambrose noted. She came here from Beverly University in Salem, Professor Flitwick told me. Apparently she was highly regarded there. Phileas said he found out sometime after she took the job here that some of her colleagues thought it was a step down. Is that a wizarding university? Lydia asked. Possibly the finest in the world, Ron affirmed. Certainly the largest. I've heard Hermione talk about it lots of times. What's the quickest way to get to America? Asked Harry. That'd be Vinny, said Hagrid, appearing in the doorway. Sorry I'm late. One of the unicorn foals had a jippy tummy. Anyway, why do you want to go to America of all places?